James Mirtle, senior managing editor at The Athletic. Good morning. What's up, brother?
Not much. How are you?
I'm good. Okay, so Brad Treliving is going to speak today. So I guess we're actually not done on the Morgan Rielly thing. I just promised. I just did this 10-minute intro of I'm done with this. Here's the take. Everyone's kind of in the same position. But what are you expecting him to say today? Because a lot of people were calling for the Leafs to be a little bit accountable on this one, or at least stick up for their guy. I personally wish it was Shanahan because he was a part of the Department of Player Safety, and so his words to me would carry a lot more weight. But yeah, I don't know if he's hiding or he's trying to empower his guy. Usually I feel like the president-GM dynamic is, hey, when things are going great, the president will show up, and when things are going poorly, send the old GM out there. But yeah, what do you make of this one?
I think what he's going to talk about is they're going to appeal the suspension and say they don't agree with it. That's what I think is going to happen today. So, and then there will be an appeal process, and David Perron went through the same thing when he got 6 games, and it went all the way to Gary Bettman. And I expect, knowing how upset the Leafs organization is about this and the ruling, that's what's going to happen here.
So, what are they most upset about?
They feel like it was too much. They feel like if you look at other cross-checks to the head around the league, that they weren't getting in-person hearings, and the other part of it too is that Morgan Rielly's track record is as a Lady Byng nominee, a guy who barely ever takes a penalty, and they felt like that should have been factored in a little bit more. And they also, what Sheldon Keefe said, when did he say that? I think he said on Monday, he said that, the Leafs seem to be in the center of these examples more often than other teams for whatever reason. I'm not phrasing it the right way, but basically Sheldon Keefe said that because they're the Leafs, that this kind of thing seems to happen to them. So that's not just a Sheldon Keefe thing. That's how the organization feels about it.
I got to tell you that part of it does bother me at times, even though they might feel that way. There is a bit of just victim mentality with this organization, whether it's the way they get treated by the media or the Department of Player Safety, whatever. That they let that get public sometimes, to me, feels a little annoying. But I don't mind them sticking up for Morgan Rielly in this case, and I kind of like the idea of them saying, no, we're not just going to take this lying down. Because, yeah, I think it is at a point where they got to read the way that their fan base feels about this one, and for the most part, it's great displeasure with the way that Morgan Rielly was portrayed and great displeasure that Morgan Rielly is going to be missing 5 games. I will say this, though. Everyone was bracing for 6 or more. Because once it was an in-person hearing, it seemed like that was basically a certainty given the track record of in-person hearings. It ends up being 5. Do you think any of that Leaf stuff, the articles that were written, the conversations by other media members, ones that, obviously carry a lot more weight than, say, this show, that all of that stuff around the Toronto Maple Leafs and the amount of suspensions they've accumulated and the way that they're treated by this league and the threat or the looming potential of an appeal, do you think that actually did impact the Department of Player Safety in coming down and giving Rielly fewer than 6 games?
I bet you that hearing yesterday was very heated and very long and complicated, and I'm sure that had something to do with it being 5 games instead of 6, and that the Leafs came armed with a lot of examples and ready to defend the player. So it'll be interesting to see what Brad Treliving says. I mean, it's not often that the GM comes out and talks right after a suspension to, I can't think of another example where maybe, I guess some of the Kadri things, but even then I can't remember if the GM came and talked about it, but the Leafs organization looks back. You remember the Spezza one with the knee to Neil Pionks? That's one where they felt like it was too much. The Austin Matthews cross-check on Dahlin in front of the net, they felt like that was too much. I think the organization feels there's a pattern here where, why are these suspensions higher? Why are we the most suspended team in the league? We're not getting hardly any power plays ever. In the Matthews era, the Leafs, I think they're last or pretty close to last in the number of power plays they get. They're not a physical team, and yet they're getting suspended all the time. And and I heard you say this on Leafs Talk. A big chunk of that is Nazem Kadri doing the things that he did in the playoffs. So I think you kind of have to discount that. But all I can tell you is the organization feels like there's been a bunch of these that have been overboard, and I think there's a feeling that maybe it's just because the spotlight is so bright on the Leafs and the media attention is so much that they get penalized more than other teams.
So I really here's what I'll say with this. The young Leaf fan part of me goes, yeah, and I could see people saying, I agree with this right now, because there are a lot of people who feel that way about the penalties, about the refs, about the suspensions, about the media, right? Like all these different things, they coalesce and work against the Toronto Maple Leafs, and poor them. But I just, even as you're saying it, all I can think is this is such loser mentality from the organization top down. And this is just so pervasive amongst them, is that it's never, accountability within the organization. It's never, oh man, we got to clean things up, or we got to do this. And I'm not saying this case specifically, but I do think that there is something to all of this that you're talking about that lends itself to part of the team culture and is at least a fraction of why they are where they are in terms of, their success or lack thereof. Anyways, but back to...
So let me ask you, JD, do you say that because of just what you see publicly from what comes out of the Leafs, or is that like
both?
Some of the things that you hear?
Both.
Because what you're picking up on is 100% real.
Yes,
100%.
That's what I'm saying. It's both. It's both.
When you spend a lot of time around the team, as I have in my career, you really see it. And some of it comes out in some of the player comments, some of the things that Mitch Marner has said, like they lose game 3 in round 2 last year, and he's talking about the media. And it's like, what does this have to do with anything? And I'm sorry, I know there's a lot of media here. I don't think the media here is that tough. It's not like Philly or Montreal or Vancouver. There's a lot of people that there's tons of media. There's more media here than anywhere else. But I don't think that they're overly negative. I don't think that they're the reason why the Leafs can't win hockey games, but it seems like over time there's become this mentality in the organization that that's a factor in why they can't win. And I guess kind of like a victim mentality that I think you're right, that I think they just need to get over, and they just need to ignore all this stuff and just win hockey games.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. If it was just the Department of Player Safety stuff, I would go, okay, I get this. But the way that this is being spun, again, I want to see what those numbers are without the Kadri stuff, because does anybody really think that any of Kadri was unfair?
No.
Does anyone really feel like that was different? I think that the gripe some fans have, which is fair, is that there have been other plays that have been really poorly adjudicated by the Department of Player Safety. Of course. This is a sport that's very different from the others. And basketball, it's pretty easy, right? If you're going to be doling out a player suspension for a physical play, it's even fairly simple in the NFL. They don't really do suspensions. They do fines. They accept that their league is really fast, and it's got to be quite a dirty play, like Vontaze Burfict level, for them to say, no, we're sitting you out for football games here. The threshold is different, and it's annoying for fans. So I'm just saying, in a vacuum, this one thing would be fine. But adding the Nazem Kadri thing to it and saying, okay, how many examples of this are there really? It's Austin Matthews cross-checked a guy in the face and throat in a game, and he was pissed off. And I'm like, that should be a game. Okay, so maybe he got one extra. Jason Spezza's one where he knees a downed opponent. They could have ruled that as a bang-bang. They could have given him the benefit of the doubt. That one I actually think is the most egregious. But how many of these games that Toronto gets are actually the Toronto tax, as McKee likes to put it, versus how many of them are, fair or at least reasonable? And I think this one is a little unreasonable, to be honest. This one is the first one that I looked at and went, I think that he should get a suspension. But when they went in-person hearing, I was like, are you kidding me? Dangle said it best when he's like, is this the second dirtiest play of the year? Because there's only been 2 in-person hearings. And I said, no, not.
I thought 3 or 4 games is probably the right number here.
Exactly. So this one felt a little different. But I'm just saying it does paint a larger picture where it's like, okay, so the Toronto Maple Leafs truly do believe that the media is against them, that they believe the officials are against them, and that they believe the league is against them. And do they use this as a galvanizing thing? Do they use this as, okay, well, we're going to show everybody wrong? It's like, no, they often use it as well, that's why things went poorly after they do. And that part of it I find a little frustrating. Anyways, Tree Living is going to address the media today. But why do you think Shanahan's not here? Because if you do have an issue with the Department of Player Safety, it sure would be great to hear from the guy who was in that role criticizing you. I feel more comfortable being critical of someone's work if I've actually done the work rather than if I'm commenting on someone's job and I have no idea what they actually do.
How many times does Shanahan talk a year?
Sure, but don't you think that this would be sort of a specific instance in which he has the expertise to actually step up to the plate and deliver a message? Like if you're Peros, I would be listening with a more refined ear if it was someone who had actually been in my position rather than someone who's just like, you suck at your job and you're like, oh yeah, well, you don't even know what I do.
I mean, Shanahan does so little media and is so. I think that's always been part of his plan was to be in the background and to not be the face of whatever's going on, and he's successfully done that. And I find it even interesting, with the team struggling and with some of the off-season moves not working and whatever. Everyone's like, oh, Tree Living had a bad off-season, and it feels like there's so little blame, I guess is probably the right word, that goes higher when, here's a GM that came in at the last minute and had a really difficult task in front of him. And of course there were mistakes made. And, I think Shanahan's successfully not been the face of the team in a way because he's just not that visible media-wise. He just doesn't do a lot of interviews. He's never on the radio. He's, he's around. You see him around the arena, but in terms of public facing, he's very, very seldomly available.
Again, I understand this to a degree, even though he has been there for some of the media avails when things have been at their toughest. And it almost felt like he was actually stepping in to either defend Dubas at times or be there as a counterweight to Dubas, knowing that he would be maybe a little bit more personally tied to something or be a little bit more frustrated in those moments. Obviously, it was Shanahan that delivered the killer instinct line that we carried. Well, I think to a degree, we still carry it till today. I just think that in this instance, when you're talking about, like, I don't need to see from Brendan Shanahan all the time. I understand the strategy. That's why there's layers in a corporation, is that it's, it's easier to blame someone beneath you and it's easier to shield yourself from those below you when there is some kind of person in the middle that is able to deal with the traffic. And that's what Tree Living is doing. I'm with you. Like, I never thought Tree Living would take as much heat as he has this year. Given the circumstances of this, I thought people would be pretty squarely focused on Shanahan as this being his season, and yet halfway or beyond halfway into it. And most people do have that line of Tree Living, that's a bad signing by Tree Living. And I'm like, yeah, I guess so. Like you mentioned, he's scuttled in the door. He can't even sit at the draft. And it's like, wow, this should be his team. It should be his fingerprints all over it, not the guy who was before even Dubas. But I just think that what you mentioned about how often does a GM speak after a media conference? That's exactly it. That's why I'd rather see both guys at least together. Like, you don't have to usurp Brad Tree Living. You don't have to undermine his authority. You could easily stand with him and everyone would understand that you could come out and say, during my history with the league, here was the way that we doled stuff out. This is the way we felt like we tried to find some consistency. These were the levels of transparency that we had with teams. And if you're aggrieved, I would like to have the examples beyond just the number of games. I would like to have how Brendan Shanahan would have actually dealt with this differently in his role, given the fact that he has done it, and put that out there publicly. I don't think that that's too much to ask. And if you're not going to do that, then it's harder for me to appreciate, what you're actually bitching and moaning about. Because, like, you have the guy. You have the number one guy who should be out there speaking today and criticizing that group. And so if this is going to be a one-off, then cool. Make it a one-off with both guys. Don't just send Tree Living out there to say you feel like it's unfair and then not elaborate on why you feel that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point. I mean, we'll see. I think Brad Tree Living's someone who he's going to be super diplomatic about it. Like, I don't think this is going to be like throwing a.
No,
I mean,
I don't think so
he's
either.
not going to throw
awesome
a bomb
guy.
at the league. Yeah,
that's his main thing. Is he's so good at being a good guy. Yeah,
and that's part of why he fit coming in, is that he calmed over a lot of what was going on at the time when they brought him in, and won the staff over and won the players over, and ended. I think a few weeks ago you called it the Civil War. Ended the Civil War in the front office, and so I think he's going to be very diplomatic about it and just say we're appealing and here's why. And it's not Shanahan's style to come out and start criticizing the league and saying this is the way I would have done it in that job. That's just not who he is.
Then don't complain. Like that, be the change you want to see in the world is what I say. That's my issue here. I'll stop berating it, and I get it. I'm kind of beating a dead horse at this point. But to me, in all walks of life, if you are going to be a complainer, right? There's two types of complainers. There's the person at work who just who complains and is like, this isn't fair and this isn't good and blah, 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 blah. And every time it's a quiet moment, they're crying about something. And they go, oh, yeah, okay, well, what's your part in this? Like, what are you going to do to make things different? And then they're just kind of like, oh, well, I'm doing my job well. You're like, okay, well, fine. Get out of here then. I'm tired of hearing it. Or there's the type of person who at work bitches and moans about something and goes like, this is not right and this isn't good. And then they actually take it to someone and they try to make an effort. And they say, here's why it isn't right. And this is why. Because I'm doing this and this person's doing that. And here's how we can actually try and improve this and make this thing better for those of us around and improve it for the company at large or the organization or whatever you're affiliated with. And that to me is a real core problem, is if you are going to complain and you're going to make it this public and you're going to say, oh, woe is me, then I want the examples. Like, I don't view this as like, oh, well, this isn't his style. It's like, make it your style. Make it your style. Make accountability your style. That would be great. Anyways, end of rant on this. I'll move on. I promise. God, I'm so sick of this both sides thing that they do where it's like, we feel as though it's so unfair to us. Boo-hoo, boo-hoo. And then we're like, okay, well, speak on it. And they're like, well, we don't want to go public. Like, we don't want to make a fuss. It's like, okay, so you'll just make a fuss through everybody else. Cool. Got it. But yes, of course, it's the media's fault. Like, a lot of people aren't just parroting exactly what these guys want them to say. Anyway, moving on. All right, the team. Okay, what's your, like, Tavares and Marner were just sick, right? Think they're going to be back for next game? You got to read on that?
I poked around a little bit. I didn't get anything, so I don't know if that's related to the Timmins thing or not. I mean, that would be the only thing that would. Yeah, well, that would be the only thing that's what I was wondering, and no one said anything. So I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I imagine they're probably testing them for that. Like, doesn't it take a little while to get tests and results on that?
I don't know.
They were at the rink, right? So. I don't know. Maybe it's a precautionary thing. I guess we'll see. There will be an update today. After we'll see if they're at practice, and if they're not, we'll see what it is.
So basically, we are a TBD potential kissing between these. It's like the boys may have been kissing. The three fellows on the team with the mono, like, can't have it. Can't have this one.
Well,
can't lose those guys for that long.
I
like the way they played last night, but yeah, you're going to need the issue with this team is a lack of talent, not a surplus of it.
I'm no virologist or whatever. Like, I don't know how it works, but I would think, like, in close proximity on the plane and in the dressing room and everything. I mean, that stuff. It was. I remember, like, around COVID, like, they were just hyper aware of all that, so you could see something spread through the dressing room pretty quickly.
Yeah. There's still some of the funniest stuff is some of Keefe's best speeches are caught with the mask, and as he's trying to be passionate, it's just the mask slipping down and him trying to put it on, like, diligently. It's like you couldn't do it. You couldn't speak without it. He's robbed. Sheldon Keefe would have had some great speeches had the Leafs just scored some goals or he wasn't forced to wear a mask during them. Anyway, what about the injury to Jones? Wohl is practicing. They had Hill to be up. Do you expect it's going to be like what's the Wohl timeline at this point?
Getting close, but they've been very careful to say. They've been very careful to say it's longer than people were expecting. Because I think, I mean, we would be at the original time frame would be right now. You know, that
maybe
we
even
thought
a
he
little
was
earlier.
Yeah, we thought it, but I think, you know, those high ankle sprains can be really, really tough. And or at least from what I'm told, for goalies, it's even worse, just with everything all the movements that they need to do. So my understanding is it could be another week or two. So you may get your wish and Hildeby may play a game. You know, I remember that was the debate, you know, a month ago, and Samson's been able to quiet that down, but we'll see here.
The only thing is that if he was going to play a game, I would think that it would have to be against the Coyotes on the 21st or against the Golden Knights on the 22nd, and that gives them quite some time. That would lead you to believe that the Jones injury is something that's, really not good.
they're not saying anything about that one. So I don't know. I mean, stay tuned. Like you look at that lineup last night, and it's like, wow, like it got depleted fast. Like I can't remember who. Someone made a comment like that looks like a September preseason lineup with what they, like basically
like
one
split squad.
Yeah, one NHL line kind of thing. So, I went into that game being like, I wonder what we're going to get. And, you can't be surprised with this team where, they ice their worst roster of the year and play their best game, and against a St. Louis team that just completely blew up Montreal on the weekend and that has been winning a lot of games and getting back in the playoff race. And they just, like the Leafs were played. I don't know what your take on. Like, do you think that the Leafs were that good last night, or the Blues were that bad?
Because I think it was both.
Yeah,
I think that you want.
I met up with our Blues writer after the game. He's like they were awful.
Yeah,
so
they weren't good. They obviously weren't good. Like that's pretty clear. I thought that the Leafs gave them maybe only a couple of opportunities in the game to start to get going though, and that's the thing when a team is playing poorly. And a team doesn't have a ton of talent. Like, let's be real. The Blues don't have a ton of talent. They've been winning some games recently, but they beat Montreal recently. Like, you go look, they don't have a bunch of amazing pelts on the wall. And it's like, yeah, they've been getting by on squirrel meat with a lot of these 7 wins, and they put it on the ticker. They went and said, hey, these guys' power play has gone through the roof for a little while, so they're winning some more games than they have naturally. I went, all right. Like, look at that roster last night. There's nothing spectacular there, right? Like,
they have some good offensive players.
Yeah, they've got some guys for sure. Except, Shen gets walked on the first Bobby McMahon goal. Leafs legend Colton Parayko didn't exactly look spectacular. The other Kessel, who I wasn't overly aware of until last night, didn't have the finest game. 2 goals against him, where he looks a little bad on 2 of them. Anyway, I just thought this is actually what I'm asking for the Leafs. I'm not going to take away credit for them because. This is it. When a team is playing poorly or a team that isn't as talented comes into your arena and doesn't have it, I want to see the Leafs squash them. I want to see them suffocate them, and I don't want to give them opportunities. And how do you give another team life is bad turnovers, sloppy play, lack of attention to detail. And what I'll say about the Leafs last night, no horrific turnovers, right? Good attention to detail. And they just played simple hockey. How much of it was just, hey, dump it in, go chase it. Go win a puck battle along the boards against a guy that doesn't look 110% tonight. And I loved it. I really did. I went, wow, this is really refreshing. So, no, do I think the Blues were world beaters? Do I view that as the same as had they beat, an Avs team that was primed for a game like this? Of course not. But I give them a ton of credit for that hockey game. I really do. I thought that was one of their finer performances of the season, regardless of the opponent.
I mean, how many games have they played like that all year?
That's it.
I don't know if they've played.
They've played periods. They've played periods like that. No, I don't know about full games.
Full games where just in control. And, that one they were up, I think 3-1 late, and there's 5 minutes left. And I wasn't thinking like, oh, there's going to be some comeback here. Nope. I was like, this is in the bag. Like, this is over. Mm-hmm. St. Louis doesn't have anything. And the Leafs seem to have an answer for every play coming their way. And, we saw this last year from this team. Like when they were going on runs, this is what they look like. And there's been so few examples of it this year. They just haven't been that team. And, they win the 2 games against Winnipeg before the break. And it's like, okay, like, is this going to be the start of something? Mm-hmm. And then they lay a couple eggs coming out of the All-Star break against Ottawa. And what was the other game that they were brutal? It escapes me, but like, they haven't been able to string anything together. So you wonder, like, okay, does this galvanize the team? Do they do something with this? No Rielly, depleted lineup. The supporting cast really comes through and shows you something. I think they should probably keep that Robertson, Bertuzzi, Domi line together. Like, it looked like they have something there, and spread the scoring around a little bit. And if anything, I think that game really speaks to a point you've been making lately, is that Keefe needs to put some trust in some more players in the lineup instead of like barely playing people. Mm-hmm. And that game last night, I think that the players went into it and they were like, I'm going to get more ice time. Yep. I'm going to get opportunities on the power play that I haven't been getting all season. And they seemed fired up for it, and they played like it, and that's what they need more of.
Yeah, I think part of the butts get tight for the Leafs and why they feel like they're going to blow some of these games is not the personnel they have. It's the feeling like they can't play those guys. You run your top guys into the ground. They're playing, 22 plus minutes, the top guys. And then it becomes we can't make a mistake. We can't make a mistake. And it's just like anything. You can't miss this putt. You can't miss this putt. You're going to miss the putt. And I do feel like that the Leafs have that a little bit this season. And Sheldon Keefe has not had a good grasp of it. And flat out, I'm tired of the Domi thing because he's not going to develop into the defensive forward, the two-way superstar that Sheldon Keefe wants him to be. And some people probably think I beat this drum too hard, especially given what Domi has actually showed this year. But you watched him last night and you go, that guy can play NHL minutes, okay? He's capable of handling 13, 14 minutes a night. And sometimes he's down below 10. And that's infuriating to me. Like, you got to let him play. Like, it just let him play. Don't be so worried about every single, this matchup and that thing. It's just Sheldon Keefe is guilty at times of gripping the stick too tight. Flat out. He just is when it comes to some of these leads. And his team plays that way. And the other game you were referencing was the Islanders game, right? Because you said Sens. Anyway, Islanders, they blow it late to Engvall. And what happens? It's one of their best players, Morgan Rielly, with a turnover. And it's the same thing. The gripping the sticks too tight and the pressing feeling that you get with this team at times. What I liked last night was you rolled 4 lines. You gave everybody their ice. You let guys just be themselves. And you didn't feel tight. You felt like, there was a good attention to detail, but it would be a real crime if he went back to the way things were now. If he didn't learn a lesson from this. I guess the question to you is, do you think he actually will? Because sort of his entire track record as a coach is a lot of the stuff that I said before, which is when things get tight and things get tough, he whittles down the lines to 2 groups.
I think you'll probably see it here for the next couple of games, that there's going to be more rope given to some players, and as soon as they, if they lose a couple games or, then it'll probably be back to the way that it was, and not trusting his bench as much as he needs to. And it's you can't win in the NHL with 2 lines. Like, we've seen it in the playoffs again and again and again. So, and I know they need to add something at the deadline. They need more than just a defenseman. They need someone up front as well. And I suspect they're going to add something, but until that point, see what you've got, Holmberg's had a good run here. Play him more. I don't know. McMahon, like the way he looked in the AHL, is he looked like an NHL player, and he was all over the ice. And I mean, he had a goal a game with the Marlies last year. Over a long stretch. Like what we in that game last night, that's not just like a one-off fluke. Like, McMahon's got some ability, and we just haven't seen it this year. And part of it's probably he's only playing with Kampf and Reeves, and he's only playing 8-9 minutes a night. Mm-hmm. And you can see why it'd be hard to get going. I mean, put McMahon on a third line and play him with some players that have talent, and give some of these players a chance when they show what they did last night.
Yeah, I was happy to see. Like, I thought Keefe coached the game well. I do. He went with everybody. It was a real meritocracy. He started Liljegren up the lineup and gave him a ton of opportunity, and then Liljegren was on the ice for pretty much all of the worst plays, and then he bumped his minutes down to 4th. Right? You look at the end of the night, and he didn't end up trusting him a ton. He didn't just say, "Hey, you're gonna keep doing this." He went with the guys who were going. Like I said, I hope to see more of it. I'm not overly optimistic about seeing more of it, but this has been my case all along, is actually find out what you have before you start to make moves. Because the worst thing that you could do is make some trade and bring in a player. And I'm sure those 2 guys, Treliving and Keefe, would have conversations about utilization and be on the same page in terms of where the target is going to fit. But God, what a crime it would be is if Treliving trades for somebody and Keefe doesn't view that person as the right fit for what they need, and then you don't even end up getting the most out of them, and you've given up a major asset. But either way.
Or, the other danger is they get a kind of limited offensive player who's good defensively. I mean, they're looking for a center, right? Like, you get someone who's, like a Adam Henrique or something, and you give up quite a bit, and then you play him too much, and you ask him to do more than he's capable of doing. I mean, I think that potentially could be the other danger.
Oh, I actually should have asked you this. This is a good reminder before you go. Is that, have you heard them linked to anybody? Are you hearing any whispers about guys that they would like to target as of right now? Because Tanev is always the big one, and everybody's linked to Tanev, and I still am finding it harder and harder to believe that the Leafs are going to fork over a first-round pick for a rental. Like, especially given that it's Treliving's old team. I don't. It doesn't pass the smell test to me. Maybe it happens, but yeah, what centers do you think like you just said Henrique, but you think there's anything actually there? Because now the trade deadline is moving up by a month. We're basically there. This is the NHL trade deadline. Is the next 2 weeks.
I wonder if Boone Jenner is going to be potentially available in Columbus. I wonder about Bukestad in Arizona. There's like some big, strong defensive centers. Bukestad's got, I believe, another year on his deal and not hardly any money, like $2 million. Maybe that might make sense. They need a third line center that can play some defensive minutes. They need someone who's better than David Kampf. I mean, Kampf's had a terrible year. He's making too much money, and they basically. They need someone so that Domi, and then all of a sudden Domi's going to be on the wing. You could play him in more of a scoring role. I think that really balances the lineup out if you can find someone like that. And with some teams like Arizona falling out of the mix, maybe there's going to be some more names in play. So those are some of the names. And, on the back end, if it's not Tanev, I'm not saying I'm hearing this, but I think it makes a lot of sense. Like, I think maybe they make a play for Hanifin, and then that's when the first round pick's in play. And I mean, I think that you look at the package of what the Bruins gave up for Hampus Lindholm, and that's probably what it will take. And, they gave up first-round pick and I think 2 seconds and like a depth prospect kind of thing. Now, the Leafs don't have second-round picks, but it's going to be expensive. But if Hanifin's interested in signing here, I think it's something you got to look long and hard at if you're the Leafs.
Yeah. I think that's the only guy that if you're moving for that, at least we've heard on the blue line wise, that I would be willing to move the first for. Like the Tanev thing to me would be a nightmare. I like Tanev a lot. This is not an indictment of him whatsoever. It's just, first round pick for less than, a quarter of a season of an aged player with an injury history who you're just trying to get in on the negotiating floor with, despite, no real track record of that working in your favor outside of old veterans like or the one-off of Mark Giordano. Like that didn't work for Nick Foligno when they traded first for him. People like to point to the Gio one, but they never talk about how, Foligno came on this show and publicly said, they tried to lowball me and I didn't appreciate it, and so I walked to a rival. Like, okay, doesn't always work. Hometown discount doesn't always work when you're bringing in a guy. Hasn't always for this. I guess it's a bit of a different front office, but either way. I do like the idea of Bukestad, though. Like, obviously, I'm not watching a ton of Arizona games this year, but I've liked his game in the past, and he was
decent for Edmonton in the playoffs last year. I mean, he scored some big goals, yeah. So I think that's what they need, someone like that. And the thing that's great about him, and I don't know what the acquisition cost is, that there's some term there. Like it's not just a pure rental.
He's got one more year left at $2 million, which would really help this team with a bit of cost certainty, and especially a price tag that's that low down the middle, right? Like that would be a good deal for them, as long as, again, though, he's just not a guy that you could give up a first for. And so,
no, but they need to just kick tires on all kinds of players like that. And there's good veteran players, and I think the concern is going to be the asking price for everybody at this deadline is going to be really high, because what's available is not great right now. I think all of the buyers right now are just hoping that more teams fall into the seller category, and they get to the deadline and they're like, I just got to get something, and then the prices come down.
Yeah, it's funny too, because most of my mind when I think about Bukestad is Florida, obviously. That's when I watched him the most, and I was just like, that was only a couple of years ago. It's like, no, that was he left there in 2019.
Was he in Minnesota for a while?
Yeah, Minnesota and Pittsburgh were the other spots. So anyway,
he bounced around a lot.
Yeah, for sure. But again, just like a big body guy who can play down the middle and be responsible defensively. I think that's. Yeah, on a cheap contract, add a little depth to your team, an actual real NHLer. It's not bad. It's not a bad idea. Anyway, James, looking forward to both of us getting a chance to see Tree Living speak today and see how many of your predictions were correct. Thanks, buddy.
All right, sounds good.
See you, pal. James Mirtle, Senior Managing Editor at The Athletic. Anyway, I'm going to just tie this up quickly before we take a break. And it ties into what I'm going to be talking about on the other side. I won't have as much time for it. We went a little long there, but okay. I think that in general, we could probably most of us agree that in society today, not to get overly preachy, but there's a little bit of victim mentality is pervasive. It's pervasive. It's like a lot of people all over, they like to play the victim. And there's currency in that. And especially when it comes to social media, but even in real life, you see it permeate through. And with the Leafs, I am sympathetic to their plight, let's say. when it comes to these suspensions, because it's annoying, and I feel it too, and I hate it. And I watch this team all the time, and I push back on some of the officiating stuff because I do think that kind of happens to every team. And then you see the stats like last year where they don't end up with a 5-on-3, and you go, damn, NHL, that's a little fishy, okay? Oof. It's a little tough to accept that this team doesn't get any of the penalties, right? It's a little tough to accept that Matthews doesn't draw more when other superstars do. But fine, okay, ugh. So I understand their position at times when it comes to the suspensions, when it comes to the officiating, when it comes to the media, because a lot of teams, they would love, I guess, to have no coverage and for people not to care and have to do insane ticket drives to get people in the building. Maybe that's what the Leafs want, is they want to be the Arizona Coyotes. That's what Austin Matthews dreams of. He was raised on it. And he's like, man, it would just be the best if the major discussion around our hockey team was whether or not we should move. Or whether it's sustainable here, or like the Winnipeg Jets, where it's just, if you don't have everybody in town going to the game every night, it's a crisis point. Maybe that's what they want. I don't know. Based on the way that they talk about it sometimes, privately and publicly, you would think that is the case. Woe is them. Woe is them that there is so much coverage and that so many people care about the team. Anyways, my point is, when you see this stuff where it's Marner and he's talking about the media like he did earlier this year, like he has in playoff past, the way that these guys have acted as though it's adversarial. If you think I'm over-personalizing this, switch it to the Department of Player Safety that we all hate, or the officials. When you're constantly, as an organization, saying, well, this is why these things are happening, or there are so many forces working against that, I do think that permeates to everybody. I think that culture is a very real thing. It is. I've been on shows with good culture, bad culture. Everybody's worked in places where there's good culture, there's bad culture. It's just, it impacts the work. And it impacts the accountability at the end of it, because if you've got people that are just like making excuses and like, oh, this is why I wasn't able to get this done, it's like, okay, you're going to lose. You're probably, if you've got somebody who makes excuses, my guess is that they're making them in a lot of different walks of life. And that's the thing that scares me out of all of this. If I'm being real, again, two things can be true. Leafs can be getting a bit of a raw deal, but Leafs could also be making a bigger deal of it at times than they probably should. And I'm not sure if the culture is great. And I believe in accountability. I really do. And I think that people should be held accountably reasonably. And sometimes I wonder if that's, the case within the organization.